Hello, welcome back to my PowerWash Simulator 2 playthrough. My name is Tony, and I hope that you're having a great day. As with last episode, we're listening to a podcast, so enjoy that. This is actually interesting to see how this one works out. 'Cause technically, this is a premium episode. Probably shouldn't do that. I'm gonna go to a different episode. Just feel a little icky about that. So we're gonna listen to you know what? We're gonna go fresh into something. 1 second. Yeah, we're gonna do an episode of All Round Science, which is a science podcast I enjoy listening to. So let's go. It's already into the episode, so I'll link to it in the description, and you can check it out if you want to. Any ads, I will pause and forward through, or skip through. Alright, let's get to cleaning. How do I want to approach this?
Bobby, our feature today is you.
I think I'm going to do it like I did with the gas station.
You are being featured
Clear
on
up
All Around Science
the floor.
podcast.
I feel like this is your life.
This is your- yeah. There's the cue the theme music. It is it's time to talk about you a little bit. I was looking through old episodes to see, have we ever sat down and talked about our own journey in science? Why we got excited about it in the first place and why we decided we wanted to communicate it. And we kind of touched on it in a couple of early episodes, but we've never really taken the time to hear the story.
Sit down and focus on it.
Yeah.
And we asked people on Discord to tell us their science stories and stuff.
Yeah,
So.
we did. Because I think we did briefly touch on it, but I wanted to correct that and start off with you and hear from you about what is it about science that got you interested? What is the driving force behind this? Because we're on episode 286. That's not something you just do as a hobby 286 times by accident. So,
Yeah, fair enough.
Maybe let's start at the beginning. I want to know what your earliest memory is of understanding what science was, or getting excited about some kind of scientific concept, or even if you couldn't have named it, like did you see and observe something cool and get really pumped about how you could understand the world, or what was that?
That's a really interesting question because I think my interest in science, I came at it kind of sideways.
Okay.
If I really, it's
That
kind
was
of an
generous.
interesting thing to think about because I feel like science and my love of science have always been there, but if I really closely think about my history, I wasn't actively interested in pursuing science as a thing, maybe until this podcast.
Interesting.
I wouldn't have put words to it, like I wouldn't have named it, right? It's just always been something I've been kind of passively interested in. To try and answer your question directly before I go talking about something. I think I really enjoyed watching, there were sciencey type TV shows. I remember watching Mr. Wizard when I was a kid. Do you know Mr. Wizard?
321 Contact, Newton's Apple.
So Mr. Wizard, for those who don't know, circulating rumors in the
I was going to say like Nova and Wild America, but that's sciencey in a sense, but 321 Contact and Newton's Apple were
I just didn't know if they had Mr. Wizard up there on the
big for me as a kid.
But Mr. Wizard was just a science. He basically it was a TV
Beekman's
show.
World?
TV show, and he was a science and
Bill Nye, of course.
And they were always just like cool things like how far can we suck up juice through a straw? You know, how many stories can we just use these little science demos to talk about science and stuff. And I always thought that was really, really interesting. But it wasn't like the science that I thought was interesting. I've just always been a really curious person, right?
Identify with that.
So do you call that, you know, a love of science? Maybe.
Yeah.
Because I think at the core of a love of science is just, I mean, at the core of science is just curiosity, right?
For sure.
So,
well, maybe it would be helpful to hear your definition of science. And I know I've heard you say this a few times. And we have mentioned it on the show before, but to kind of get a framework for that very question, is this science or is it just the love of understanding and curiosity? What do you use as a definition of science?
that's a really good way to like tackle this, I think, you know, because if I'm thinking about it in that way, then curiosity is an ingredient for is important to get someone passionate about science. But science itself, I think, is really just it's really just a methodology, right? Like it's a way.
That is something that irritated me during COVID. When people would say, "I believe this, trust the science, believe in science," and it's like, whoa, that's not what that is. Scientific method, fuck yeah. Science is not a religion. It's not a belief. Science is data.
Through the noise to figure out what is true, and I use that word noise very purposely because I think what's important about the scientific method and what makes it so useful and why it's so useful is because we as human beings have our brains are see the world in a certain way, and they're very limited, and we have lots of biases that are useful in some contexts, but ultimately when it comes down to figuring out what's true or
Not useful.
or what's factual or not, or however you want to talk about it, like what is and isn't, you're easily tricked, right? Because our brains are very flawed and are constructing.
It's not flawed. We're just not meant to be analytical.
All the time.
We're social creatures.
And, just go look
Problem
at
solvers, yes, but not like,
watch a magician
not
do a
data
performance
driven,
and,
because data is not
very easily
natural
tricked.
in a lot of ways.
Very easily tricked, right? And so science provides a very rigid methodological framework for how to say, okay, to acknowledge, okay, we are really bad at this. We are really bad at looking at the world and understanding how it really, really works. So let's figure out a way that we can't really argue it. Or at least we can argue with it, but it's a way to take those arguments and structure them such that eventually what you'll be left with is the closest thing you can get to what's true, right?
Yeah. Is that?
That was a really long answer.
No, it's a good explanation, and I appreciate getting a deeper understanding of how you conceptualize that, because I think truth is such a sticky thing. It is a really difficult concept to really define, and if your drive is to find out what is true, then is that something that you think in itself is a value, or is that something you feel like You just want to satisfy that curiosity.
Yeah, and you have to be careful about that, right? Because it's easy to satisfy curiosity.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, like, if you feel like you have a satisfying answer to something, you think, does that settle it for you as a person? What do you think? How do you feel about it? That's a good explanation.
I think, if I'm being honest with myself, yes, a satisfying answer does feel good, but I try not to
Still
let
having
that
back
be the end
problems.
of it, right?
Because same day as the last episode,
because
so
there was a time in my life when I was younger when I used to watch lots of really questionable things on the History Channel, and I thought, that sounds pretty good.
It's on TV.
I thought it was on TV. It was on something that used to be considered an educational program or a channel.
They have known how to divide everything exactly.
And it was gross when we started doing fucking ancient aliens and fucking stupid alternate history bullshit.
But what feels satisfying?
Oh, just asking questions, man. Fuck off.
Those types of things.
The world is interesting enough, and we have fiction for the other side of it. So you don't need to fucking mix that shit together and pass it off as a fucking fact. It's annoying.
That would be true.
Do you think that was a byproduct of your brain maturing, or was it deliberate?
I think it for sure was an exploration and learning about critical thinking.
Yeah.
And the principles of critical thinking. Because not everybody learns that. Unfortunately, we don't teach that to kids as a matter of rigor and a matter of course for
Ta-da!
here in the U.S.
Don't fucking blame the U.S. I don't think anyone's really necessarily that great at fucking critical thinking.
And many good teachers out there are trying to impart critical thinking skills to their students. So I don't mean to say that that's not happening. I just mean that it's, there's no very deliberate curriculum and standards that say in the third grade we're going to have a unit on critical thinking. In the fifth grade we're going to have a unit on critical thinking.
Well,
there's
that's
nothing like that happening. And that's unfortunate. And so I didn't really learn about it until probably honestly until I was out of college.
really.
Yeah, I'm sure I was learning principles of critical thinking. In fact, I know
Yeah,
I was learning
you had to have.
in college. I didn't know I was.
Right.
And so that's again why
Interesting.
I came at science kind of sideways, because I think all along the way I was learning about science and critical thinking and all the ingredients that make it what it is. It's just I wasn't being told that's what I was learning. And maybe that's fine, but if we're talking about my particular journey to
Fair.
being a science communicator, I don't think I can be a I can call myself a science communicator unless I know that that's what I'm doing, right? And so
It's fair.
which isn't to say that I couldn't be communicating science.
Right.
Without knowing, but I'm not going to call myself a science communicator unless I know that that's what I'm doing, right?
No, that's fair. That's fair. Like, I hear what you're saying. It is possible to communicate science without fully giving it that name, and I think people have in the past before this was like a job.
Right.
But yeah, okay, gotcha.
But when I was in college, I was very interested in when I was pursuing a psychology degree, my first round in college. I
know we were just going to do the floor, but here I am.
Philosophy and logic. I
Yes.
took several logic courses. And
Philosophy.
that was probably the beginning of a more formal, understanding of this is something I'm interested in. right? I think I always was. I've always been an analytical kid. I've always loved math. I've always
Hated math.
I've always been curious and loved learning. And I remember
Yes.
when I was in
Loved science.
elementary school.
Art and science. That was what I was into.
Reading the children's encyclopedia in Ohio. I just read it from A to Z over the course of the year. You know, just because this is interesting. I don't care. I don't know what I'm learning. I don't really care what I'm learning, but I'm learning something, and that was fun for me.
Yeah.
But again, you know, learning is different than science. You know, you can learn without knowing anything about science. But yeah, so that's why I say in college when I was taking a lot of philosophy
Never
classes
forget,
and
I had
classes.
a situation in a job, or at a job, ages and ages ago. I was in my 20s, like 20, doesn't matter, 21 through 24. And I was helping a coworker, a new person, kind of answering some questions for them. And or we were talking. Yeah, I was a mentor and she was newer. So the question came up, or something came up about like watching, me enjoying watching PBS and science stuff. And I remember this girl's response being like, "Ugh, that's like learning." And I'm like, what the fuck? How is that a bad thing? Like, such a fucking weird perspective. That's like school. Ugh. So fucking baffling, because I hated school. I was really bad at school. But like, to not want to be learning, not to be interested in something, or to just dismiss something because that's like learning. That's just like so fucking weird to me. So still sticks with me to this day, age 43.
I think that's when I started
Wild.
like a more like, there's this rigorous approach to understanding things, to uncovering what's true. And I wasn't calling it science at the time.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the things that we were talking about weren't science, but logic is all about like coming up with a way to understand, you know, a rigorous way to know what is true and not. You know?
Well, it gets a little fuzzy there because we have these divisions between subjects in school, but a lot of the basic understandings of critical thinking and the origin of science as we know it, modern science or Western science, comes from the humanities, from philosophy, and from thinking deeply about how we approach things and evolving our approach to
So
control
satisfying.
biases as best we can. So it's interesting to hear you talk about philosophy and logic as kind of a foundational part for you.
I hadn't really thought about that until you just put it that way. But yeah, I guess in a lot of ways I came at science much the same way that humanity came about science, right? Like, it started with philosophy. Started with, you know, like you could argue that, and I don't think you would have to try very hard to argue this, because many people have argued this, that science has its foundations with Greek and Roman philosophers, right? Like, and I mean Plato and Aristotle even. Who was before Aristotle?
Socrates? No.
Howdy ho, and
See? Ads. Nope.
welcome to Fan. He'll be fast with
Of coming to the truth of things.
I did not take philosophy.
Quest.com. MapQuest, still getting you there.
Cough. MapQuest is back. What's up with that?
And Plato. Socrates.
Hey, look at me.
I did not take philosophy.
But Socrates, all the way back to Socrates,
So
he
great.
was trying to come up with a rigorous way of understanding, of coming to the truth of things, right? And that's what he's doing. So many would argue that that's
So
like
great.
at the root. He's trying to do what science eventually did. And yes, science, the scientific method, came out of philosophy because it's a philosophical approach.
Wow,
to
got some hair there.
I mean, knowledge and truth is a branch of philosophy, epistemology, right? So, yeah, it's what do we know to be true is what epistemology is. So, how can we say what is true? And so that's where science comes from. So, exactly.
So that the interest in science
Ding.
stems from an interest in being able to
What?
definitively say
There we go.
something about the world.
Yeah, I think
Kind of
so.
what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, and I would not have been able to, like I said, I would not have been able to put my finger on it until I just had this conversation with you. But
All
if
right.
I had to, if I
Back
had
to the
point
ground.
at a place when my
Actually,
interest in
hold
science
on.
began, it has to have been when I was studying
I
philosophy
think it's
at
5.
university, right?
That's what we have. 6.
Then-
6 is next.
Because that's what you're doing the whole
Yeah,
time you're studying
yeah.
philosophy, is trying to prove a point and show that what your perspective is true and yeah.
So in the course of your studies, did you ever consider becoming a scientist?
Oh yes, for sure, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's so funny though that all that's why again I keep saying it that I came at it sideways, right? Like
Yeah.
I didn't know how interested I was in science. I just knew that I liked psychology a lot. And yes, it's a science. But I don't think I thought of myself as a scientist or a science lover. I just knew that I wanted to study psychology and I wanted to do research
interesting.
in like that's my original plan, Maura. I don't know if I've ever actually said this to you.
Yeah, I know you haven't.
My original plan was I was going to go to school. I was going to study psychology. I loved psychology from even when I was in high school. My mom, when we were moving around to various places, she at one point was going to school for I think it was like social work. She was trying to get some kind of a degree in, so she had to take an abnormal psychology class. And so she had a psych textbook, a college textbook, and I just read that thing from cover to cover.
Amazing.
When I was in probably in 8th grade, and I was like, this is so fascinating. And from that point on, I knew I wanted to study psychology, so I studied it.
Jesus,
when I
that
went to
did
college
not last.
And yeah, by the end of it, my plan was to study school psychology and approach it from a positive psychology perspective. I've always been interested in positive psychology.
Yeah.
And so for those listening who might not know, positive psychology is just basically psychology as usual is based on an illness model describing what's wrong with people.
Yeah.
I say that with air quotes, so obviously people with
Doesn't mean they're good or bad. It's just it's a diagnosis.
or whatever you want to call them, they're not necessarily a problem. It's not what I'm saying.
It's not a determination of value or worth.
Right. And so it was always built on illness.
Don't know why we have to be like that.
Let's describe people who are depressed. What makes them depressed? Why are they depressed? People who are schizophrenia. Why do they have this problem? All that kind of stuff. But I was way more interested in what positive psychology is just saying, why don't we haven't spent enough time describing people who are healthy? Like why don't we make the same amount of rigor describing happy people? What makes them happy? And people who are well-adjusted. What makes them well-adjusted and all that kind of stuff. So I was really interested in that and applying that to education and school psychology. So I've always been interested in school and kids and stuff like that. Anyway, that was the plan. This particular part of the story is probably for a different podcast, but that didn't happen. I ended up going and getting a job at an insurance company and teaching their staff or employees how to research insurance claims. Health insurance claims. But
There you
that
go.
was the original plan. So I guess, yes, of course, the plan, I wanted to be a scientist. I guess I just didn't know that's what I was doing. I didn't know that my ambition was to be a scientist, which is really interesting to think about.
Yeah, did you have any scientists in your life?
No.
Wow.
No, I didn't. And so that's probably why I never thought of it that way. It was just, my mom was always interested in psychology. I was interested in psychology. So it was all just like psychology. Right? Like,
Happenstance.
I was that's what I
Fell
was
into
going to
it.
be. I was going to be a psychologist,
Uh-huh.
you know, and so I was just going to be a research psychologist. That's what I used to always tell people. Oh, I'm going to school to be a research psychologist, not a scientist. But of course, that's what I would have been. Was a scientist.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I did not know that. That's very cool. Now, in the interim, you went through another degree. You learned a lot about computer science. Applied your love of math to that, and when you say like this podcast was sort of catalyst for you, that this is all much later in your life. Like in the interim, did you have any space in your life? Like, were you always, listening to science podcasts? Were you reading
This Week in
reading articles
Science.
the same way that we do for this show? Like, what did that look like?
I definitely wasn't reading articles the same way we do for the show.
Skeptic's Guide to the Universe.
The way that I read science news and articles now is different than I've ever done before. But I was very interested in science as in general long before we set up the podcast. That's, I think, probably when my interest in science began to crystallize, is actually listening to podcasts. While I was working at said insurance job, and before I got the computer science degree, podcasting was relatively new, and I started listening to podcasts because I've always been a fan of World of Warcraft, and so I heard about this World of Warcraft podcast, The Instance. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to listen to that. What is this, a podcast? I've never heard of that before. Oh, that's
Podcast?
yeah. And so I started listening to that, but at the same time, I've always been into documentaries, okay? So, ever since I was a kid,
Scary thing to be into, potentially. Cautious.
Watching episodes of Mr. Wizard and Bill Nye the Science Guy, and all those kinds of things. But then, as I got older, I would be really interested in science documentaries or even history documentaries, all kinds of documentaries. I love learning. And so, at the time I found the World of Warcraft podcast, I was also on YouTube watching a lot of just like science-ish videos. Or just videos on YouTube where I could learn something, right? Like it would just be passively watching it while I was playing a game or doing something else.
Yep.
And so I was like, oh, well, if there's this podcast thing, if I can listen to episodes of something about a video game, I wonder if there's something like that, like educational, that I could also listen to, similar to a documentary. And I found the second ever podcast I ever listened to was The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe.
Yes.
Fuck, look at
I
that.
found that because it was listed high up in the science category.
Steven Novella.
Science and education category of the podcast. And I still listen to that podcast today.
Oh,
And listening to them
Skeptoid.
was that's when I realized that I had a passion for critical thinking and science. Because that's what they talk about. That is what the podcast was. And I learned about this concept of scientific skepticism, which was something I'd never heard of before, but as a lover of philosophy, that resonated with me a lot, because skepticism is this philosophy, like, of questioning things and looking for evidence and accepting things to be true if there's evidence for it, right? And so what we're talking about here is science and scientific thinking and how you think about science. And of course there are science podcasts, so they just approach it from this scientific skepticism. Right? And that's when I started to more formally understand that, I do love science. Like, because they would do similar things to what we do on our show, right? Every episode, they'd be like, this is happening in the science community. And not coincidentally, but as a side note, their show was what inspired me to eventually want to make a science podcast.
Huh.
I love what they're doing. And as a side note, I said it took me a long time to identify as a science enthusiast and a science user, especially long before I was ever calling myself a lover of science. I identified as a creative, right? Like someone who just made things and loved making. And so for me, I was acting a lot. I was putting on plays. I was public speaking. So there's like the concept of like a performer play. There's reaching out. I've been doing that since I was in middle school and loving it. And there's me and my friends would make short films and all sorts of creative things. I was make music and play the guitar. Like I was just I identified as a very creative. I don't want to say artist because I don't really think of myself as an artist.
But you also didn't think of yourself as a scientist. And you're not, but you're into
I
science.
always wanted to make things, and so podcast became something that I was interested in making.
I am not a scientist. I am interested in science.
I've told the story about the origin of this podcast before, so I won't tell that story. But yeah, that's where that came from. I've always had this urge to create and make things and be creative. So
Well, that's really cool. I feel like I definitely learned something about you. And correct me if I'm wrong, you maybe learned a little something about yourself.
I really think you have made me look, inward and think about things that I've never really been able to put my finger on before. And speaking of creativity, I've always said that science and being a scientist, like it's a much more creative endeavor than I think a lot of people give it credit for. So I don't think that those are even incompatible anymore. So
Of course. I mean, at the end of the day, we put these lines and categories around things, but knowledge all really, it's an intricate web. Like there's no real separation between math and literature, between science and philosophy. Like those are artificial, I think, when we draw stark black lines between the
there's no hard line there.
Just leaning in on one part of the web.
yeah, that's why I think that at the root of all of it, and the thing I think, like if you really could just lean in hard to, like if you have children or anything like that you really want to inspire in kids, I really think curiosity is the best thing. Because curiosity, it doesn't always lead to science, but it always leads to something good.
It's the understanding.
Like a lot of art is just curiosity about your feelings, curiosity about the world around you, and you just deal with those questions and thoughts of curiosity in a different way through artistic expression.
Yeah, finding new ways to express yourself overall.
Yeah, it's not always just like, you're curious, so you're going to ask questions and then try to solve them. Not everybody wants to answer the questions. Some people just like thinking or expressing. But I think at the root of all of it, curiosity is just curiosity leads to empathy, and curiosity is just the most critical, fundamental thing that we should be inspiring
Agreed.
I love that.
Hello and welcome to the Political Orphanage.
Switch it up.
a home for plucky
That other one
misfits
was over.
and Problem solvers. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton. And here is the story in a nutshell. For umpteen thousands of years, subsistence and starvation were the default state. Virtually everybody was one drought away from famine. Then, capitalism. And it worked really well. Over the next 2 centuries, we not only eradicated starvation, we became so good at making surplus food that something totally new happened. People got fat. Now, for the first time in history, instead of dealing with malnutrition and starvation, the masses suffered from obesity and diabetes. About a quarter of the population, the elite, had the money and time to get memberships in gyms and personal trainers, and they were not worried about calories and remained fit, slim, and hot. For them, this system worked incredibly well. It provided the abundance for calories and the money for personal trainers. Meanwhile, people in the bottom 75% were getting fatter and angrier. They felt the shame of Hollywood and fashion industries. They felt elite skinny people looking down on them, assuming that the obesity was sloth and gluttony, some kind of character flaw. Well, these people had a harder time dating. They also felt more inclined to stay inside and watch television than to play sports, so they sat at home by themselves and became lonelier and disrespected, far lonelier than their starving peasant ancestors used to be. With myriad health complications, a loneliness epidemic, and a sense of palpable condescension from the skinny elite, they became increasingly angry and despondent and said in a loud voice, "This system does not work. The system is broken. We are miserable." Now, the people in that top 25% cohort who got as many calories as they needed but could afford gym memberships and personal trainers to massively misdiagnose the actual problem. One group refused to acknowledge the problem existed at all. They looked at the angry masses and said, "What are you talking about? The system works great. We've never had more calories in all of human history. Do you have any idea how many of your ancestors starved? How many people for thousands of years, even when they had food with worms in it and gruel that was stale and old and not with the requisite vitamins, it didn't even have salt or pepper or hot sauce. Most of history is just skeletons frantically raking soil to eat by one more wretched day before they perish. That's all gone away. You're doing so much better than everybody else before you. We're all beneficiaries of this amazing system. There is no problem." Meanwhile, there was a contrary viewpoint. They looked at
I dig his show a lot.
and at the bottom 75% that didn't have personal trainers, and they said, "What a glaring indictment of capitalism. Look at the inequality between people who can afford personal trainers and everybody else who cannot. All of these poor people who've been deprived by capitalism of personal trainers, who've been made fat by capitalism's poverty." When the masses say, "We are lonely, we are disrespected, we are unhealthy," this group says, "We figured. You want to wealth tax because capitalism is evil." And they proceed to come up with a series of policies that would get rid of all the surplus calories that had been already developed under this system and plunge the world back into subsistence and starvation. Neither of those groups denied is actually identifying the real problem, and they're certainly not coming up with good solutions to it. But we will today, right here on The Political Orphanage.
Ba-da-da-da.
My guest today is Brent Lindsay. He is the Senior Vice President at the Niskanen Center and the author of The Permanent Problem, The Uncertain Transition from Mass Plenty to Mass Flourishing, which you can find on Amazon or wherever you get books. But I also put all of the books we discuss in this program at mightyheaton.com/featured. Hello, Brent.
Hi, Andrew. Nice to be with you.
I enjoyed your book. It made me think a lot. And I would love to talk to you about some of the malaise and tumult that has set into modern society and what you can do about it. So let me kick off with this question. I read a lot of history. I am well aware that I have a godlike level of affluence compared to the last 300,000 years of human beings, and specifically just in my family. My mother was visiting me over the weekend. One of the stories that we have in our family is my great-grandfather got appendicitis and just had to keep plowing because they were going to starve to death if they didn't do that. This is someone almost within living memory. I read this stuff, I look at the economics and go, I'm doing great. Like, the system's working well for everybody. You push back on this kind of comparison. Why?
Well, I don't push back on it. It's just not the whole story. So it is absolutely the case that we are living at a level of material affluence that is just preposterous by the vast bulk of human historical experience. So only in the last couple of hundred years
Hardcore?
has any large group
Hardcore?
of people in any society started to break out of mass poverty. Poverty, living right at the edge of subsistence, was the norm for human beings
There we
from
go.
300,000 years ago till an eye blink ago. And so it's only really, in the United States after World War II that you have a mass society in which the kids born, the baby boomers born after World War II, were raised basically being able to take their basic material needs for granted. This was something completely new and different under the sun. Now, poverty, which was, just the basic expectation, the default for human existence.
It's a blue window.
Kind of a tragic rarity. This spread to the rest of the North Atlantic world and to Japan. It's now spreading around the world. Absolute poverty has fallen dramatically in recent decades. So this is a big deal, and I think it's a massively underreported and underappreciated deal. But it isn't enough to keep us happy. So once we achieve this level of material affluence, we don't stop worrying. We start worrying about new things. We move the goalposts. Once upon a time, you improved your well-being by eliminating those dire material deficits that prevented any kind of decent, normal life. Now, those deficits have been filled for most of the time, and so we go on to think about. We worry about belonging and meaning and status and self-realization. So we have much higher expectations. And I think that's where we are right now in this melee of the 21st century. We're caught in this no man's land between the achievement of material plenty, which is an amazing historical achievement and one that we should be proud of and should be grateful for. But then translating material plenty into mass flourishing, into really high-quality lives accessible to most people, that's still beyond our grasp. And indeed, some of the features of modern life under mass affluence, some of the changes in the economy that occurred as a result of mass affluence, some of the cultural responses to being rich that have happened in the ensuing decades have actually complicated the task of translating material plenty into what we could call spiritual plenty. This is my big picture frame for why, as Louis C.K. said about 20 years ago or so, everything is amazing and nobody's happy.
I love that clip. I absolutely love that part of his act. Well, before we get into the spiritual slump that you denote in the book,
Definitely better than jerking off in front of people.
Terms and concepts that we might use for the rest of it. So the title of the book is The Permanent Problem. What is the permanent problem? And is this the same thing as Keynes' general nervous breakdown?
So I stole that line from John Maynard Keynes. He used it in an essay called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. John Maynard Keynes, famous British economist, a giant of the middle decades of the 20th century.
He wrote this essay that came out in 1930 in the depths of the Great Depression, but he was bold enough at that
Oh,
time
didn't
to argue
notice the handprint until I just got rid of it.
calamity was really just a bump in the road of a much larger historical process of modern economic growth, and that barring just utter calamity, that by the time his audience's grandchildren were their age, that is about 100 years from when he was writing, which is a few years from now, he said that the world would be about 8 times richer than it was at that time, or that England would be about 8 times richer, and he's correct. He argued that when this happens, when poverty has gone from being, what humanity's constant companion to being something off on the sidelines, that what he called the economic problem, which is keeping serious material deprivation at bay, the economic problem would be solved. And at that point, he said, humanity's permanent problem would come into view, and that is how to live wisely and agreeably and well, in his words, with the blessings that scientific progress and modern economic growth have bestowed upon us. He got something very wrong when he looked into the crystal ball. He figured that we would be sufficiently beyond economic motives by this point to only be working about 15 hours a week, so that didn't pan out. But he also said that this transition from dealing with the economic problem to rising to the challenge of the permanent problem was going to be traumatic, that it would require unlearning the habits of untold generations and would occasion what he called something like a general nervous breakdown throughout society. And that seemed to me, when I reread this essay, that seemed to me like a pretty good description for how things feel right now.
So in terms of that general nervous breakdown, is it the trauma of transitioning, whereas the previous 300,000 years, just don't starve to death. Don't starve. We've got to get out. We've got to plow. We're going to starve to death if we quit doing it. And being happy was, to a great extent, not being afraid of starving to death or being murdered. And now we're not worried about starving to death, so we're going, I don't know, I'm working more, I have all this money, I feel bad. Is that it? Is it that affluence itself causes problems?
I was like, shit.
Are
Might not been recording.
Happiness? What is the
Sometimes the VU meter doesn't move, and I'm like, shit.
Expectations are raised, right? So happiness equals, reality minus expectations. So if your expectations go up and reality doesn't, keep pace, then you get less happy, even if things are getting better in some absolute sense. So relative to your expectations, relative to people's expectations, things stink right now. Americans, large majorities, have been telling pollsters since the 1970s that America's on the wrong track. There's lots of dissatisfaction in American society. I would say that for the 25% or so of people in the highly educated, professional and managerial elite, things are really, really good. People have the opportunity to flourish in their work life because it offers lots of autonomy, it offers intellectual challenges, it offers the structure of a career path, it offers status, that you got a cool job that was hard to get, it offers ample resources. So those people have not only the resources, but also all those spiritual benefits, the status, the intrinsic rewards of working on something intellectually challenging. Most people don't get that in their work life. So their work life lacks autonomy, it lacks a career path. They may get along with their coworkers, but there isn't that. It doesn't feed their soul in the way that professionals can become workaholics, right?
Gotcha.
Meanwhile, a lot of the consolations for being less well off in the past, tight-knit communities, the solace of religion, a lot of that has faded away. A lot of the vital social connections that bind us together and that give us shared meaning have unraveled in the wake of mass affluence. A lot of that is because face-to-face relationships, which are vital for our ultimate well-being, used to also serve just in eminently practical, urgent practical functions. So your kids, they helped out on the farm, they took care of you when you were old, your spouse was a partner in economic production, your neighbors were,
policy against bad times and a posse if bad guys are coming. And maybe the only alternative to listening to the crickets at night as far as entertainment is hanging out with them. So other people were important. Now, all those things that we used to rely on face-to-face relationships for fulfilling urgent practical needs, we've outsourced to the market or to the welfare state. So people, our face-to-face relationships have really just become sort of one more consumption option amidst a multitude of expertly marketed alternatives. All too often, we succumb to that expert marketing at the expense of what's best for our long-term interests. So we value the quick hit, the quick dopamine hit of consumerism, of watching the next TikTok video, calling that, our old friend that we haven't talked to in a month. And so there are temptations to affluence that lead us, that distract us away from the things that are most important. And meanwhile, the substance of economic life really isn't delivering intense satisfaction for most people. So most people, I think, are coming out behind in terms of the ultimate building blocks of a fulfilling life compared to a time when they were materially much worse off.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. So first, there's a delineation between people in the top 25% that are knowledge workers that have a high education and fulfilling jobs, and everybody else. I'm presumably in that camp, which is part of why Grandpa had appendicitis. Resume could make. But I'm not spiritually deprived in the same way that a lot of other people are. Something you bring up in the book that had never really occurred to me is the difference between the material abundance and the status associated with your work. That if we were to go back to 1940, every young man in Germany, the Soviet Union, and the United States, and the United Kingdom knew they were the most important group in the world. Like every poster that you would see on the wall was a young man about to go off to war, or alternately was a young factory worker, a laborer, from whom the fate of the free world or the communist world or the Nazi world depended on. You were very important. Whereas now you have more money, but your importance to society seems much less. If you're in labor, you're not as important, so there's a decline in status, if not material affluence. And then the other bit, I guess, like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it almost sounds like capitalism's working too well, where we now have so much entertainment that I just don't go hang out with my neighbors anymore. We have so much entertainment, I don't call my friend Jennings to drive me to the airport. Excuse me, we have Uber, so I don't call my friend to drive me to the airport. But as a result of, basically we have so much food, we all got diabetes. But that's happening on the spiritual level, that's happening on the emotional level.
Yeah, so first to go back to sort of the contrast between the industrial age and today for most working people. This is the big, the macro breakdown in social solidarity is this reopening of a class division now along educational lines. So once upon in the industrial age, work was dangerous and dirty and low-paying compared to work today, but it was objectively important, right? So blue-collar workers, factory workers were necessary partners in industrialization. You had to have brave, strong men manning those machines to make them go to power progress. So technological progress, the progress of the capitalist system, was intensely dependent on large inputs of brute physical labor. This created enormous instability. It created this huge class conflict because people didn't like doing that dirty, dangerous labor, and they didn't like being imposed upon and being, sort of regimented, like an industrial army. And so they fought back against it. They formed unions, they formed labor movements, they formed socialist movements. Totalitarian communism got off the ground. We got a Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation. You can't really get more instability than that. So class conflict in the old age, caused a lot of conflict. But it was born out of the intense importance of ordinary workers that the system depended upon. So now, technological progress much less dependent on dirty, dangerous work. We've automated a lot of it in the rich countries. What's left, we've outsourced to poor countries. So as far as rich countries are concerned, technological progress is now no longer a mass mobilization game. It is a game for highly specialized, highly trained specialists. So So that means that the work that ordinary people do is simply less important existentially than it was in the past. Once upon a time, they were there on the frontiers of technological progress, at the auto plants, at the steel plants, along with their bosses. Everybody was doing the same thing at different levels of the hierarchy, but they were all in this common project. Now you've got what used to be the working class kind of shunted off into economic backwaters of retail, personal service work. They're not doing things that propel the system forward. The industrial era was the era of the common man. The socialist movement believed that the factory worker was the protagonist of world history. The capitalist world saw that the socialist movement was powerful enough that they better treat workers, pretty nice. They were in systemic competition with the socialist world. So this elevated the status of ordinary workers to a high degree that just is not replicated today at all. There are no, Diego Rivera epic murals of Walmart greeters or call center workers, right? So that
Ain't that the
status
truth?
decline, I think, is a big element of this relative spiritual impoverishment.
Never really thought about it that way.
Even have experienced, even in the face of material betterment. On the other side, so we have a circuit of goods to choose from. We are, it's made very easy for us to get what we want. It's not made very easy for us to want what we want, right? So we may definitely want a drink, and at the same time definitely want to not want that drink, right? So our second order desires are the ones that ultimately govern whether we live a well-lived life or not. Our other ones are just sort of, they're just as a slave to impulse, as a slave to distraction, we get whatever is coming to us. And the market is very good at giving us that. It's not very good at giving us the patience and acumen and judgment to choose between, longer-term fulfilling pleasures and shorter-hit, ultimately empty pleasures. So, we've got better access to healthy and nutritious food than ever before. 40% of us are obese. We have all the world's, information at our fingertips, and now in the 21st century, raw IQ scores are actually going down. We're entering what people are calling post-literacy, as even elite college students now can't make it through reading assignments that were the norm for generations past. So yes, we're having a problem, dealing with our affluence to sort out, wanting what we're supposed to want
Good.
for our
It's
own
good.
good.
Okay.
But on top of that is this class division, which I think is a starker problem, where some people are just on the outside looking in, not feeling. It's one thing to be oppressed, like industrial factory workers felt oppressed, and there is a kind of heroism in banding together and fighting against that. But when you're scattered and disorganized and not oppressed but simply ignored, you're just superfluous. There's no heroic posture to get in to resist that. It's just demoralizing.
Yeah.
Do you think that's why we shifted to culture wars? Like, I wasn't around for the 60s, but I feel like the 60s was more class warfare. There was more talk of the proletariat versus the capitalists, or organized labor versus the guy that owned the factory. Whereas, I think, unquestionably, we live more in a culture war time now. Is that because we figured out the material stuff, and so people are now wanting importance as opposed to affluence? Are people misconstruing things? What's the difference between the two? Yeah, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's on the right track. So I think our politics shifted in the 1960s.
I don't always listen to his podcast on time, but then I'll listen to an episode and I'll be like, why didn't I listen to this earlier?
At that time, the 60s boom.
Wow, the sign moves. That's cool.
We really did think that we were on the verge of a completely post-scarcity society. People were, that was, we're having an AI hype cycle right now. They had an automation hype cycle back then. They thought that they were on the verge of people working 5 or 10 hours a week, and what are we going to do with our free time and all of that kind of thing. So people really did have very high expectations that this boom was going to keep going and not slow down as it did in the stagflation of the 70s. But in the 60s, they had very high expectations. And so at that point, the egalitarian left didn't see, much drama in the contest between haves and have-nots, because even that relative have-nots had two-car garages, right? So and there were pockets of poverty, but now that was sort of a kind of exclusion, a problem of exclusion and not being mainstream more than being a problem of the mainstream being poor and the have-nots being the masses. So you got the reorientation of the egalitarian left away from economic have-nots to belong-nots, people who were excluded from the mainstream. So the poor,
Up there last time.
also, women,
Come on, there we go.
minorities, gays and lesbians, Native Americans, anybody outsider, even like the environment was an other, right? So it was a lot of shifting the attention to now we're going to be the champions of the other, and that generally was cultural other, and so by the time in the 1980s inequality was rising again, it became clear that the old politics of haves and have-nots hadn't run out of gas. The battle lines had already shifted. We already moved into this world where instead of having a sort of unified economic elite right versus a common person left with a few intellectuals in charge, providing some leadership. Now you had dual elites. You had the kind of mercantile elite, the business elite, but then you had the professional, managerial, intellectual elite, and those people, they certainly weren't worried so much about dollars and cents issues, so cultural issues were much more important to them. And so they stressed that in their politics much more. By now dividing ordinary people into culturally liberal and culturally conservative folks, most non-highly educated people are relatively socially conservative, so the white majority became kind of right-wing culturally, and the left became less and less interested in courting the white working class because it was culturally retrograde. Minorities hewed to the left because of historical circumstances, even if they were actually more socially conservative than the people running the show. But as politics became more and more taken over by elites and run according to elite priorities and elite values, we shifted the main battleground of politics from economics to culturalism. And that makes up for much nastier politics because it's easier to compromise about dollars and cents than it is about your identity. And it also, when you're talking about practical issues like, kitchen table issues, that just orients you towards a problem-solving mode. How are we going to use our instrumental rationality to make the world better?
Yeah, I was about to bring that up.
You and how it works to me.
You have a good delineation in the book between instrumental rationality and expressive rationality, and I read about that. That kind of clicked for me. I think most of the show I'm doing. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Identity politics lends itself to expressive rationality. So doing things to ensure that you're a member in good standing in your group. So a lot of performativity in our current politics of people displaying and performing their identity, confirming their status as a member in good standing of their political tribe. Not a lot of orientation towards actually doing stuff for your tribe, more just orientation towards making your tribe look good and the other side look lousy.
Yeah, I gotta say that's like I read about that instrumental rationality versus expressive rationality, and I was like, I think that explains all of the friction I have in my career right now. Because I'll go on other shows and go, hey, I think we can solve this problem by doing this and this. What do you think the problem is? And they'll go, the problem is the other team is evil and we're the good team. And like that's the constant conversation I'm having is, well, what if both teams have good and bad people on them? Okay, what do we do to fix the parking situation? The problem is the other team has crappy cars, they're evil people. Our people have better cars. Like that is just again and again where I find myself, that feeling good about yourself and feeling good about your tribe as opposed to doing good for the world. I think that's a very salient point.
And actually less feeling good about your tribe than just hating the guts of the other side. So we call this negative partisanship. And it's people aren't like partisans, intense partisans don't have super favorable ratings for their own party. They just despise the other side.
And
is this because the culture war shift that you mentioned, where we started sorting into either managerial elite and money elite, or is it that there has been this decline in cultural status, and so I, the guy that feels that I've lost my status, I can now get it through the tribe by being a partisan and hating the other? Where do you think that animus comes from?
Well, I think you can certainly see where populism, right-wing populism, comes from. First, these are people, a lot of the people are, on the outside looking in economically, they're not part of the elite. Even if they're rich, they're not part of the professional managerial high
Class.
status elite. They're used car dealers, lawn service owners, right? Local business people. Those are MAGA stalwarts, along with white working class. But it is a rebellion of everybody else against the professional managerial elite, who control the main levers of economic power. They also control the main levers of cultural power. That didn't used to be the case. The rich people and the people who were the cultural tastemakers used to be completely different demographics. Now it's the same highly educated folks that control, not only economics, but our, what's culturally relevant. So all of this power
Okay,
feels like
I
it's amassing
think
in one group of
we're
people.
gonna be done.
This one group of people has very distinctive values, separate from
And
everybody
honestly,
else, much more
we made
progressive,
some
much
serious
more,
fucking progress.
Sort of skeptical
Well,
about
that can't stand.
traditional verities of patriotism and family values and traditional family values, right? Religion.
There we go.
So you have
Oh, what is
the
that?
masses rising up against their
Yeah, there.
the condescending beggars, and so while
All right,
the elite,
so
looks down at horror at the white working class and their retrograde views, the white working class looks up at
thanks
these
for watching.
stuff shirts
Have a great day.
and
Bye.
the